Thank you so much for taking some time to have a chat with me. I know you're a very busy lady.
Oh, no worries.
Should we just start then by just talking a bit about your role at Scottish Widows and how you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a long name and then I have a long title as well. So normally struggle to fit it in, and things. But so my title as Scottish Widows is Head of Pension Investments and Responsible Investments. What this means really is that I have two teams that I look after. So I look after the investment proposition team, but then I also look after the responsible investment team. And the reason why this role was created like this, it was created and then I was hired to to do it, so because Scottish Widows realised that you can't have RI and ESG just sitting kind of in its own silo, just doing its own thing, so with just some specialists looking at it and then, it doesn't like permeate throughout the whole organisation. So by me also looking after the investment proposition team, which is the team that designs all investment solutions, so decides on the default fund structure, designs fund ranges, right? So by having those teams kind of together, reporting into one line, you create that cohesion, and it works really well, to be honest. And I've been doing this now for 2 years, almost 2 years, and I think one of the reasons why we've got quite a lot of progress very quickly is because of the structure. So because RI is not siloed out, kind of in the corner of the organisation.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, doesn't it? Combining those roles. And can you just say for people that, might not understand some of those kind of terms that you use, like what does investment proposition mean, like in practice, in super simple terms?
Yeah, so it's basically, so we look after, so at Scottish Widows, we have about 6 million customers, probably more now than 6 million. And what that means, we look after their pensions for them. So, when you work, you save money through auto-enrollment, and, some like this money goes to a pension provider. Given that we have 6 million customers, probably every 10th person, has, roughly speaking, has a pension with Scottish Widows. And then in the investment proposition team basically decides like what does that investment look like? When the money comes to us, where does it go? Where does it go by default? So if you don't make any investment choices, where does this money end up? What does that look like? What is it invested in? Because it's all invested into companies, right? So it's kind of decided the structures of, invested sustainably or unsustainably. So kind of the decisions that we're making, should it be a little bit in property? Should it be a little bit, in corporates? And should it be a little bit, somewhere else? So it's kind of deciding, what that looks like by default, but also deciding, for those people who want to make their choices and their own decisions, well, what different options should we offer? What do people care about? So doing research, with customers, understanding what they're interested in, then monitoring what they actually do and kind of refining that proposition. So basically what we offer to our customers on the investment side.
Yeah, okay, that makes great sense. So I want to move on to talking a bit about net zero. So there's this big sort of movement and campaign towards shifting the finance industry to transitioning to a low carbon economy, essentially. And from what I understand, you led the way in terms of getting the net zero commitment from Scottish Widows. So I just want to ask why that was important to you, and how did that process happen? Let's assume there's someone working in a pension that hasn't made a commitment yet. How did you go about it? What advice could you give to someone else?
I think the advice I would give is that it's probably a little bit boring, but it's kind of all about getting your stakeholders on board, like getting everybody on board. Spending time with people, like explaining to them what this means, I suppose. So we all have different levels of knowledge of sustainability and how sustainability interacts with investments. And, some of us are completely there understanding that, if your investment's unsustainable, then you're not going to have good returns. Like, you have to make them sustainable, right? So to make sure that, things you invest in are still here, the companies are still here for the long term, they don't go bankrupt or anything like that. So you need to make sure it's invested sustainably. But then there's still also people, everywhere that kind of worry about it and just worried about, well, actually, how can you have your cake and eat it, essentially? Like, that's not possible, so if you're doing something good with your investment, you must get then bad returns on it, so they're worried about that. But that's been proven wrong now so many times, because we can see now sustainable investments outperforming over a number of years, kind of non-sustainable investments. So it's kind of it's making sure that everybody's on the same page. But for us at Scottish Widows, what is very helpful is it's kind of two things coming together. So we have a lot of passionate people kind of on the ground. So a lot of colleagues that really get it, really passionate about it, really enthusiastic. They see their purpose in doing this, and making sure that our vast portfolio transitions to net zero. And we'll have about over £170 billion that we'll look after. That's a huge amount of money. So, people who've been looking after investments for years, they found new purpose and they come to work all energized and, wanting to do this, to actually make sure that all this money is diverted, and invested sustainably. So we have this kind of grassroots passion coming through, but then we also have a very passionate board. So the board that really understands the value of Scottish Widows as a huge institutional investor is essentially a universal owner, because we invest across the globe, and such a big amount of money that if we shift this amount of money, it actually shifts things in the real economy. So we have this board that's really enthusiastic about it as well. So we're kind of coming together in the middle, and that's where the magic happens, so we have kind of top down and bottom up. So it all came together at a very good time. So I feel like I just helped join the dots, when they joined, basically. So it's kind of all there, but slightly separate, and I just brought it in together, focused everybody, set up the responsible investment team that just kind of cracked on with getting things done, and that's how we're here.
That's amazing to hear, actually, just how passionate people are on sort of kind of both ends. Because, having, I've worked in the industry for, nearly a decade. And I still remember a time when boards just wouldn't, or pension fund trustees just wouldn't even look at it. They wouldn't consider it. It just wasn't part of their fiduciary duty and not something for them to be concerned about. So kind of hearing that there is passion throughout Scottish Widows like that is just, it's really encouraging. And I hope that's the case in other places too. Just to talk a little bit about, so you were saying, and this is a really important concept, I think, for pension savers, is that you're investing for the long term. And so you need to think about what companies and what technologies and what our economy is going to look like in the long term, and invest that way. What is long term for you? I mean, I think different people have different concepts of what long term looks like. What's yours?
I mean, in pensions, we have the luxury of looking at a long term in decades, so we can look ahead, decades ahead, and thinking, so our youngest customer will be younger than 20 years old, so that's a very long time for them to save before they come to retirement. But then at the same time, we have people who are retiring right now, but then, with the reforms that we've had recently, they don't necessarily take the money out, so they can retire, but they continue to invest again for decades. So even if you're, 60 or 70 retiring now, you might still be able to draw, bits of money from your investments for decades, and the money is still invested somewhere, and, giving you returns, but also doing good, hopefully, if we invested properly. So it's a very long-term vision, which is very good for pensions, because we can take that long-term view, and we can invest with that approach in mind, rather than worrying about the everyday kind of here and now. We just need to make sure that investments are properly diversified, so that people are not too worried about too much volatility day in and day out. But at the same time, it's a balance to strike. So because if they're young, they can take it on, they're not going to take the money out. It doesn't really matter if it goes up and down a bit, as long as the long-term trajectory is that it just keeps going up, right? So it's kind of trying to not put off people the investments and savings, but at the same time do what's right for them, so it's a very interesting job.
Yeah. So just very quickly on your net zero commitment, what does that look like? Do you have some interim targets?
Yeah, sure. So we have made the net zero commitment overall for 2050, and we're saying kind of it's going to be 2050 or sooner. So we'll need to see how the economy develops, because no investor themselves can turn their portfolio to net zero like this, right? So there has to be action in the real economy. There has to be action from governments. So we're saying 2050, but we constantly review our strategy, regularly. So we'll be able to bring it forward if we need to. But we also have a crucial milestone target of 2030, where we're targeting halving the carbon footprint of all our investments. We've recently calculated the kind of baseline carbon footprint start with, against which we will measure the 50% reduction. So that's our 2019 carbon footprint. It's, I believe, getting published today. Actually, just later today, it's going to be on our website. So that's like the baseline against which we'll measure every year and publish every year. So that's crucially important. That's in line with the 1.5 degrees trajectory, with all the kind of scientific knowledge about this. So we need to at least have the carbon footprint by 2030. So that's what we're targeting. And we're also going to be announcing today our 2025 target for investment in climate solutions and climate aware strategies. Because if you think about achieving net zero, there's two things that need to happen. So on the one hand, so kind of one strand is you need to decarbonize. So you need to reduce your carbon emissions right now and dramatically. But at the same time, you also need to make sure that finance flows into climate solutions, into green tech, into clean energy, into natural capital, because nature is so important in general, but also when it comes to fight against climate change. So it's kind of those two things need to happen. So we've kind of brought all of that into our targets, interim targets and the long-term targets.
And so the net zero commitment, that's like a significant move. Are there any other sort of areas that you're looking to develop, or some other goals you have for Scottish Widows in terms of reducing its negative impact, but doing it in a way that value of their investments are still protected?
Absolutely, and that's probably the point I should have made early on. Our first and foremost responsibility is to our savers, because they rely on us, they trust us with their savings, they rely on us to make sure they have money to retire on. So we're not just making these decisions willy-nilly, it's only because we believe that these decisions actually make for a better investment for them. And in terms of like net zero can't be at all cost. So it has to be that we facilitate a just transition. So that is meaning, taking all the social factors into account as well, the social situation, societies in your local communities. So we can't just say, right, let's just close everything that's fossil fuel and then just leave people stranded. We don't retrade them, don't give them new jobs, and then we just do something else altogether. So the whole society has to transition in a just manner. So that concept of just transition, otherwise it's not going to work. And to be honest, some people have said, oh yeah, well, but like often the social side gets forgotten and we just need to focus on net zero. But I'm thinking, if we can't do that. We can't actually transition if we leave people behind, because a lot of these decisions are political. And if right now we have the support, so all our political parties in the UK seem to agree that net zero is important because they have their voters' support. But if suddenly we start making decisions that completely alienate parts of the society, they're going to start voting differently, right? So we need to think about it in advance, and we need to make sure that what we do, like we have a sustainable, just transition to net zero. It's such a big change. So it's the biggest change since we've had the Industrial Revolution. So going from fossil fuel to renewables, and we need to make sure we do it properly. And this is an opportunity as well to think about issues like gender. Women are disproportionately affected by climate change, but they're also disproportionately underrepresented in decision-making positions. When we're now making decisions about this just transition, we need to be really aware of gender issues and how we can make sure that we tackle them at the same time. Because again, it's such a big shift in society and such a big opportunity to get it right and change the status quo. And then kind of on that, probably I'll just segue into another area that's really important for us. So that's diversity. So we think about diversity, and in our stewardship, we tackle cognitive diversity on boards, because we think if boards are cognitively diverse, they avoid groupthink, which is what got us in so many problems and troubles. So we avoid groupthink. They're actually better in decision making, so they make better quality, more rounded decisions. And that cognitive diversity comes from, there being diversity of gender on the board, there being diversity of race, of religion, of backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. So we want to see that richness on boards that represent the richness we have in the society, so that when those big decisions at corporate level are made, that then affect, the environment, affect nature, affect, workers' rights, they actually have representation.
Yeah, so when you say cognitive diversity, what you mean is like diversity of thinking and perspectives and
thinking, yes, diversity of thought, and that it comes from diversity of backgrounds.
Yeah. No, great. So let's move on to the stewardship bit then. I think a lot of what we need to see more of are institutional asset owners like yourselves and others doing more on the stewardship side and like really sort of trying to power through some change at these companies, just as you were talking there about cognitive diversity. So can you just like guide us through what that looks like? What does engagement between the asset owner, you, and the companies look like?
Yeah, sure. So because we're an asset owner, not an asset manager, there's kind of a layer in between as well, so there's a bit of a middleman between us and companies we invest in. So we're the asset owner, we make decisions, then the money is actually being invested by an asset manager, and then they normally tend to do most of the voting, engagement, so all of that. But given how it's important to us, because that's what makes a difference in the real world, stewardship is so important. We take a more active approach to our stewardship. So we like to think of ourselves as an active owner, and what that means is that we definitely have kind of a lot of focus on what our asset managers are doing. So we get under the skin, of their voting practices, of their engagement, just to make sure that we're satisfied, or, if we're not satisfied, we'll make sure we tell them, and we expect them to change, and, we'll tell them and tell them again until they improve. And, we've had quite a few successes with that, so we're quite pleased with that. But we're also, because we have so much investment, in particularly in our kind of top holdings, if we look at our top 100 companies that we invested in, it's like billions, in some of them. So we have that direct conversation with companies as well, and they're more than happy to talk to us, which is great, so they see us as one of the, probably our brand helps as well. So, so it's a good thing, and it opens doors, and we have those conversations, and we try to make sure that we're additive to what our asset managers are doing, and that's why kind of understanding what the asset managers are doing, and then, doing things in addition to that to kind of help move that conversation in the right direction. And for example, so we've kicked off at the beginning of this year like a 3-year engagement program. So we have, we take like a little step back to explain. So we have an exclusions policy. We don't invest in certain areas, so we don't invest in controversial weapons manufacturers. We don't invest in companies that derive more than 10% of their revenue from thermal coal and tar sands, because those are like the most destructive practices when it comes to fossil fuels, and we're looking to reduce that threshold to phase out those companies from our portfolio in line with the global exit from coal as well. But we also don't invest in what's called United Nations Global Compact violators. So United Nations Global Compact is this big agreement, global agreement. It has about 10. It has 10 principles covering things like the environment, labour rights, human rights, anti-corruption. So it's kind of across the spectrum of ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. Those are very, very important principles. And then there's certain companies that violate those principles, and that causes obviously them to become value destructive, so they get huge fines, they'll lose their consumers, so it's not great. But it also sends a good signal, that we expect companies to live up to those standards and not violate them. So we don't invest in them, apart from we've segregated a group of them where we think we can make a difference through engagement, where we've looked at them and they're large companies, they're in the public eye, so there's pressure from other investors and pressure from the communities on them to change. And we thought we're going to try for 3 years to engage with them and see if they can clear that violation, because then it would be something useful that we do rather than just sell it to somebody else, just try to make sure they improve their working practices, for example, which would be, a good positive outcome of stewardship. So we have about 10 or 11 companies on that list. And we've started this engagement with them, and it's going really well. And companies really are open, they're talking about what they're doing, how they're trying to fix those issues. And, well, most of them, and some aren't as open, or like very defensive, don't recognize there's an issue. So, which is very interesting to see kind of across this quite a small number of companies. But what we are doing is like over 3 years, we'll continue talking to them, continue kind of putting that pressure on them. And then if we come to the end of 3 years and some of them have cleared that red flag, then we'll keep them in a portfolio. And those that haven't, then we'll divest from them. And they know that. So we'll set it out from the start. So they know there's a deadline, of these conversations. They're not just going to be kind of forever conversations.
Yeah. So just a couple of questions on that. So you were just talking about some of the companies there that aren't open and potentially are, less inclined to want to change or acknowledge that there's a problem. I mean, how powerful is an asset owner, like just generally like Scottish Widows, in influencing change with some of these companies? Because I'm imagining that there needs to be a certain level of trust and conversation that's built up between you and the company. But they could just shut their door if they wanted to and just say, you're too difficult, you're asking too much of us, so we're actually not going to take your calls. Like, does that happen? Because I think there is an assumption on the outside that you own that part of that company, and where you're invested billions, like a huge chunk of that company. So can they just shut the door on you if they feel like it? I mean, can you talk a bit more about that?
I mean, they can. They absolutely can. Like, they don't have to take our calls, but that doesn't take away our shareholder rights.
Yeah.
So if they wouldn't talk to us, then we can use our voting rights, against board members, for example. So, we won't support re-election of the board members, so we have teeth as well, before it even comes to divestment. And sometimes they probably, hope for divestments. So, they hope that we'll just divest and kind of go away. But, while we're still invested, we can actually, if we wanted to, we could make the life quite difficult, by using our shares to vote in a certain way. And I mean, you've seen what happened with Exxon, which is just this fantastic example of shareholder advocacy. And our asset managers have supported that, which I'm very pleased about. So we've been talking about it with them, saying, what are we going to do? We should support engine number one, and the new slate of directors. But that was a huge example, a turning point in shareholder advocacy when, a company who completely refused to engage and to change and, to acknowledge that there's even a problem now has 3 new directors who were appointed by shareholders. So it's fantastic. So it just shows that it can be done. I mean, it's not as easy as it seems, but it can be done. And particularly, if a company is as important, on the societal scale as Exxon, it makes sense to actually put the effort in.
Yeah, so that's almost where the sort of magic happens. It's at those AGMs, isn't it? That's kind of where you can make companies' lives really difficult if you want to.
Ideally, you really want to, right? That's conflict, that's difficult. Ideally, you want to meet with them, talk to them, and if enough people kind of talk to them on the same issue, they get it and, they do something about it. So that's like the best way. But there are several other steps of escalation that can happen.
No, that's it. Yeah, sorry. That's what I mean. Obviously, a conversation is ideal, and doing it that way. Because I think there are still a lot of people out there who are just, just see divestment as the answer. It's just like, just get the money out. I don't want to part of it. I don't want to profit from those practices. I mean, does divestment actually have an impact in any way apart from, maybe having an impact on their social license to operate? I mean, further than that, does it affect the cost of capital? I mean, what does divestment really do?
Yeah. So to start with, what divestment does first and foremost is kind of takes the risk away from our portfolio. So if we think about, what's the right thing to do for our specific customers that we look after, sometimes divestment is a really good answer. Because we take away that risk and then we'll pass it on to someone else to deal with. If we think about, how do we want to engender positive change in the real world, then divestment is one of the things you can use, but it's not as powerful as stewardship, as voting. So that's where you can actually make a difference. And you're right, so things like taking away social license to operate. Like if a lot of people are divesting and vocally divesting from a particular company, that really affects their reputation. So they get a lot of negative reputation, which is not great for any CEO. If there's an actually big scale of divestment, it does affect the cost of capital over time. So it's a sense that market signal and kind of societal signal. So it is important. It's one of the tools you can use. But generally, if you want to make a difference, it's best to try and change the company while you still hold it. But it gets to a point, as I said, we need to look after our customers and their investments. And if the company is completely not engaging, and say, for example, if the company has loads of investments into coal, so they're a big coal producer, we know that coal needs to go, right? So it's not king anymore. It's the king is dead, so there's no coal. So they need to come out. We need to come out, So if they're not trying to reduce their reliance on coal, if they're not trying to wind down those operations and instead invest more in coal, then we know that becomes potentially stranded asset risk. So something that might go bankrupt overnight because, COP26 agreed something, right? Or a particular government made a new regulation. So we could see companies and potentially kind of whole industries becoming kind of extinct overnight. So that's when we really need to think about, what we want to keep in the portfolio and what just poses just too much risk that we don't want to take on.
Yeah, so I suppose that policy piece is really important for you to keep an eye on. Do you have a policy team or somebody that does that for you? Because I guess that those policy and regulatory changes send a strong signal about what's still going to exist in the future.
Yeah, we absolutely do. So we ourselves obviously keep an eye on everything that's relevant, but we do have specialist teams that then send us updates and have you seen this come out, and there's analysis, and so it's really, really helpful. So for example, so far what we've seen from COP26, what's coming out, we're expecting that it potentially will accelerate the transition. So because there's a lot of conversation and agreements that now cover oil and gas as well, not just coal. And I know there's a bit of controversy in the last day or two about coal and China, but generally there's a faster direction and bigger buy-in on the exit from oil and gas, which makes us think, okay, so that exit might be faster than we expected, so we need to take account of that again in our engagement and in our portfolio structure as well.
Yeah, and I suppose, so this is something you'll just have to look at all the time, right? So even your net zero commitment and just seeing whether that still aligns with actually what's happening in the economy in terms of decarbonisation. It's interesting.
Very, very important.
Yeah. I quickly just want to talk about performance. You mentioned earlier that there's loads of research, and I've seen this research as well, that sustainable investments don't necessarily perform worse than unsustainable investments, and sometimes outperform, particularly in periods of volatility. I just wondered, what you're seeing and what kind of research you refer to when you do talk to colleagues or anyone else about the benefits of considering all of these issues.
Mm-hmm. So obviously we'll look at past performance, but and the past performance case is now good, so there's been this big piece of research done a few months back by Morningstar when they looked at quite a large selection of funds. There's hundreds of funds that they looked at, and then compared kind of traditional funds with those that are managed with ESG parameters, and kind of overwhelmingly ESG type funds, sustainable type funds have outperformed. I particularly like academic research, so So empirical is obviously also good, but so there's a piece of research, is a meta study done by NYU Stern Business School, and they've looked at like about 1,000 different other papers that looked into performance, and they've sort of put it all together, summarized it all, and then they looked at ESG, and then also separately at climate as a special factor, to say whether companies tend to outperform or, perform better or not. And again, the evidence was that they outperform both on ESG, but also if you just look at climate, that works as well. So that was really interesting. But also, our job is about looking ahead. And I don't think anybody can honestly say right now that looking at what's happening, looking at COP26, looking at, governments completely, getting in with the program of decarbonisation across the world, even in some like really staunch supporters and of fossil fuels, and they're still making commitments, like China for 2060, like India for 2070. I mean, that would have been unheard for like a couple of years ago, so now they're in the room, they're negotiating, they're even setting some kind of targets, right? I mean, it's brilliant. So anybody who's looking at this, they can't possibly say that we don't need to take that into account when they make investment decisions, and if we keep what we have, it's going to be fine. It's not going to be fine, so you need to realign your investment thinking with what is actually happening in the real economy to then get kind of better returns, or at least like not lose out, not lose out from this transition.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges of the industry, is it's very backwards looking, when actually everyone needs to focus on what's going to happen in the future and have that long-term view. But yeah, I mean, one of the many challenges that we face in sustainability and transitioning. Let's move on to your savers, and let's talk a little bit about how they can engage with their investments. I mean, or their pension savings. I think the trend at the moment is that not many people are really engaging with their pension savings, and that's part of why I have these interviews and try and help educate people on their sort of powers, to engage with their savings and their investments. They're the ultimate owners, after all. How do you help your savers engage with their savings?
Yeah, I'll just start by saying you're absolutely right, Charlene. People are not that engaged with pensions. It's something that, people tend to find boring, complicated, something not about today, but something that they need to think about, like way in the future, so they don't need to think about it now. And I find it's because probably a lot of people don't really understand. So we don't have that great financial education in our schools. I don't think people really understand how pensions work, and the fact that they actually invested in companies that, all the brands that we know and love or absolutely hate and want to boycott, right? All of this, is in your pension. And as people start to kind of understand it more with the help of Make No Money Matter campaign, for example, as people start to understand more, they want to know more. And we're starting to see in the last couple of years, the interest from our members is increasing, so we get more and more questions. That we try to answer. So people are starting to kind of connect the dots. Because if you invest in something now, you can actually make a difference to issues and causes that are important to you. So if you really big on climate change, you could put your pensions in the sustainable funds, into fossil fuel free funds. If you don't want to invest in fossil fuels, so there's things you can do. If you're big on diversity, you can find funds that specifically target kind of more diverse companies or women on boards, that kind of thing, right? So there's all this kind of a flavor of investment for almost any issue that you care about, and I think that's really, really important. If we get that across to people, they can make a difference right now with their investments while they're still saving for retirement. So it's almost a bit like charity that a lot of us give to. And I mean, Britain is one of the most charitable nations in the world, and we still like to support the causes that we care about, but we don't realize that we can actually do the same with our pension if we invest in the right way, and also benefit from it ourselves. So it's a brilliant win-win. So what we're doing, so we're trying to understand what our savers actually want and what they care about. So we run research about ESG themes to see are those specific themes that resonate more or less with our members, and then try to give them those specific options. Because while we're looking at ESG at the whole portfolio, making sure overall it's sustainable, we're conscious that individual people might not care about all of it in the round, and they might just care about specific things. And if we did have an option for that, it might make them more interested in pensions, more engaged with pensions. They might put more money in, which is actually the biggest driver of a good outcome in retirement. So it's what you put in. Investment is only kind of second important, what you invest in. It's how much you save. That's going to determine, how much you have when you retire. So if that makes people more excited, more interested, and want to put more money in, then that's a massive win for them as well. So we try to do that. But the way we try to engage people is, obviously the industry is just bad. As an industry, we're bad at engaging people with pensions. All we know how to do is kind of send them big packs of paper that just go straight in the bin. Nobody reads them, So we then started to maybe send them emails, but then the industry is like so. Our data, I suppose, we rarely even have everybody's email addresses, so it doesn't really quite work. But what we have done, we've worked on this for a year, and it literally just launched this week. So finally I can talk about it, because I've been dying to talk about it for a year and I wasn't allowed. But we worked on an app. We call it the Find Your Impact, or FYI. So kind of FYI, on top of your financial performance, there's the non-financial effects of your pension.
Wow.
So there's an impact on the world in terms of carbon footprint, in terms of diversity in your portfolio, in terms of waste generated, so all those important credentials that now people can see just in the palm of their hand, basically on their phones. So if you go get the Scotchwidows app, if you have Scotchwidows pension, that's where this kind of feature is coming in. So and it's lovely. It tells you that impact. It tells you that at kind of your top level of all your pension pot, but then you can break it down and you can dig further and further down. So you can dig into individual funds that you have and see the sustainability kind of impact of those funds, and you can see then maybe, oh wow, that's really bad, but that one's much better. And that might make you think, when you make your investment decisions and your fund choices. And then there's another layer down, you can see the companies that you invested in those funds. So again, kind of bringing that education and to say, did you know there's actually real companies? Oh, there's Amazon in your portfolio, there's Facebook, or whatever it might be in your portfolio. And then it gives you that breakdown on sustainability for those companies as well. So you kind of really start connecting the dots. So
wow,
that's kind of
huge.
I'm so excited about it.
Yeah.
But then it has another part which is called Have Your Say. So once you've had a look at this and maybe make some changes, if you want to, but then you can also have your say, and you can talk to us, and we will ask you lots of questions about, how do we make our investment proposition more in line with what you need? Are there specific funds that you want? Are there specific things you're more interested in? So how would you like us to vote on a particular resolution that's coming up? How would you like, we're engaging with this company, we're not making progress, what do you want us to do next? So we can actually start engaging our customers, because as you said earlier, you're absolutely right, it's their money. So we think we know what's best, but it's really good to actually ask them and make sure that we're on the same page with them, so I can't wait for this to, properly get into everybody's phone and start getting this rich data that supports our decisions. So hopefully, already planning kind of in the year's time, hopefully to have all this information and be able to share it with everyone and, say, well, this is what's been happening, and, this is how we've made decisions and on the basis of it. But it's fantastic because we're here to do right by our customers, and this is just completely connecting us to them, so we're really excited.
Oh, I just love that so much. That is so exciting. What a great thing. And it just provides everything. So you've got the funds, you've got the individual companies, you've got the sustainability rating for those, you can vote, or that's so fantastic. You should be so proud of that.
Thank you very much. And it's only the start as well, so we started with those 3 parameters, just to see how people get it, if they're interested, and then kind of ask them what more they want. But ultimately, I want it to look basically a bit like Netflix, so when you open it up and it just says, oh, there's all these things which ones are you interested in, and then you click on, say, okay, biodiversity, okay, kind of health, nature. So you click on all of that, and then it just pulls that information that's personalized to you, about your pension. So you just look at what you care about, and you get that personalized data, which would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's so great. So, I mean, it's fantastic what you're doing. I just love that so much. And that's what we really need, is just more opportunity for people to engage with their pensions. It's going to make such a difference to both them and society. So that's wonderful. But I mean, not all pensions are doing this type of work, and aren't engaging with their savers as well. I mean, what do you say to those savers? I mean, how should they engage with those pension funds that are still dragging their feet on thinking about sustainability as an important thing? Because, society has got to get better. We have to mitigate climate change. We have to improve opportunities and well-being for everyone. We need to do all that stuff. And we also have to protect our pensions and make sure that, we are doing well in retirement and can have a comfortable retirement. There's still pensions out there that aren't listening to those savers wanting both of those things. What advice would you give them?
I mean, just the traditional, just write to them, so write to them, talk to them, tell them what you think, make their views heard, because those like pension trustees or providers, they're not oblivious to it. And, the more pressure they get, the more they have to react to it. And we now have, so in the UK, we have about 2.6 trillion invested in pensions, and we have about just over 800 billion of that now targeting net zero. So there's still a way to go. So it's a really big chunk of money, but there's still a way to go. And so have a look at Make My Money Matter website. There's some really handy templates, and you can kind of copy and paste and send to your pension scheme or your pension provider. So absolutely, just get involved, and it all adds up. So you might think, like I'm just one person, will they listen to me? But the strength is in numbers, so if everybody writes to them, then they will absolutely have to address it. They won't be able just to continue once they know. So right now they might be thinking, kind of covering their eyes and thinking, well, we haven't heard anything, we haven't seen anything, so, we can assume, but then they won't be able to assume anything. They're going to have to react.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm coming to final questions now. Thank you so much. This has been so great. What do you wish savers knew about pensions that they don't at the moment?
You probably heard this already, so I'm not going to be particularly original, but what I really wish people knew is the difference in impact on the world that their pension saving has compared to their daily lives and what they actually do. So Nordea did this research, and then Make My Money Matter did a similar research, and the one answer was 21 times, the other one was 27, but it's kind of still in the ballpark figure. So that's 21 times plus is the impact of you changing your pension into sustainable funds compared to you eating less meat, stopping flying, showering for like 2 minutes max, traveling everywhere just by public transport that's low carbon, all of these things that we try and do in daily lives, thinking this is going to make my personal impact, I'm going to improve, I'm going to be better for the environment, with my lifestyle, actually gets dwarfed by you moving your pensions into sustainable, into green funds. So I really wish people knew that, those people who want to make a difference, that they really need to look at what their pensions is invested in.
Yeah. And yeah, just a bit on kind of the logistical side, like how would somebody start a pension with Scottish Widows? I mean, what's the process? Do they have to do it through their employer, or can they do it directly? Can we give a little route?
Yeah, so the majority of our business is through the employers, so we call them workplace pensions, so that, you'll probably be, if you work for a company that has a pension with Scottish Widows, you'll be just auto-enrolled and you'd kind of end up with Scottish Widows, through your employer. We do have a part of the business that's individual pensions, but they are, not your workplace pensions. These are for people who want to set up, maybe self-employed, so they want to set up their own individual pensions. And most of it is through advisors, but I do think I do know we have kind of there's an opportunity for people to just get their own. But I think for most people, the important part of the pension is their workplace pension, so their auto-enrollment pension where the employer also pays in. But given that people move jobs so many times, I'm sure, and how big Scottish Widows is, I'm sure you'll have a Scottish Widows pension. Most of people who are listening, will have a Scottish Widows pension, even if it's like a past investment. And, you can always kind of consolidate pensions. And, I'm not trying to say come to Scottish Widows, but just saying have a look at what you have across different providers and different pensions. Have a look at what they invested in, what the options are. And if you find something that's good, that you think is sustainable, at a good price, then it's very important for you to bring it all together. And it doesn't have to be Scottish Widows, although we'd love to, but it's that action of consolidating your pensions in one place. It's going to be really helpful in the future, when you're trying to make decisions about retirement, So, all of us will have quite a few jobs. And imagine when you're like 60 years old trying to remember what pension you had with who when you were 20 and trying to write to them and find your pension pot, right? So it's much better to think about it early on and just make sure everything's in one place. So that's just my kind of generic advice of kind of managing pensions.
And so last questions. I mean, do you still feel like, I think there's been such an amazing shift in the industry and in the finance industry more generally towards considering sustainability issues, and we're starting to move on to kind of like real world impact as well. What are the challenges that you come up against when you're talking to peers in the industry, or are there barriers that still exist in finance or in pensions, and what do we need to overcome those barriers? Is it a cultural shift? Is it a piece of policy? Is it something else? Because we're not moving as quickly as we potentially could. I think we all have to be a bit more bold. So yeah, what are the challenges and what are the solutions?
Sorry, I'm laughing because you left probably the biggest one you left for last,
Yeah.
That's such a question. And I don't want to kind of just spend like 10 minutes talking about it, but the one thing that is the biggest barrier for pensions to making the real difference is the fact that right now our pensions, so the DC pensions, defined contribution pensions, which is what all of us have really, is they can't really invest in the liquid assets in private markets, which is, without making it too complicated, is basically all we invest in now is the companies that are traded on exchanges, so they're kind of daily traded, and you buy in shares from other investors and you sell them to other investors, and you just kind of trade between people, who invest in this company. Whereas if you invest in private markets, you invest directly into a company, so you give money to a particular company, so maybe a startup that's developing an exciting piece of cool green technology, or a company that's manufacturing wind turbines, or there's an infrastructure project on electrification of kind of charging infrastructure in the UK, so everybody can charge the electric cars everywhere. So they're normally, they're not traded on stock exchange. You have to give money directly to the project. And we really struggle right now with our DC pensions to allocate money to that. And, I was talking about it earlier in terms of it's important to decarbonize, but also investing in climate solutions. And the direct investment into climate solutions is a crucial piece. And we're still struggling. So that's the biggest barrier that I talk about to our peers. How can we all work together to actually break down that barrier? So, so part of your pension will be invested in, some of the wind turbines that you can see, in the field, or kind of all of these fantastic things that actually make a real difference. So we're working very closely with the government. So there's kind of a group of people that, different companies that all try to work together with the government as well to break down those barriers. And we've made significant progress over the last few years. So I'm quite hopeful that we're almost there, and I think that would make a huge difference, because again, think about 2.6 trillion in the UK in pensions. Even if a small proportion of it goes into real projects in the real economy, it's going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, that would make a huge difference. How far away do you think we are from that? Because I know it's tricky, and I guess those projects are seen as high risk. So I'm imagining part of the idea is to combine sort of public and private finance to reduce that risk. I'm making an assumption here, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a correct assumption. Yeah, it's that, but it's also, it depends on what you invest in. So if you just buy and kind of invest in the private company that exists and it's operational, it's if you're doing private equity, that kind of thing, it's different. So it's there's a whole spectrum of like super risky kind of venture capital or like really risky infrastructure to something that's pretty safe. So, and it's kind of figuring out then. Once we have access and we know we can access it, then we'll make investment decisions just like we make investment decisions and everything else, and balancing risk return, and kind of positive impact, and so all of those things kind of trying to balance and make the right decisions. But we just need to make sure that we can access it. And as I said, the government has been really supportive. And there's been quite a few regulatory changes, and then there's another been promised by Rishi Sunak, that like they're looking into again. So I feel like we're getting so close. So
like a year, 2 years.
I hope that it's that kind of time frame. Yes. Yeah. I'd be really upset if it's not done in the next year or two.
Yeah, it's that would be such a powerful shift, so powerful, because you're right. We need the solutions, and the only way to support the solutions is by being able to invest in them. So yeah, I totally get that. And just kind of changing track a little bit, just as my final question, you have achieved so much in the industry and you're doing great things, and it's just so lovely to speak to you. What advice do you have for women in the industry, sort of working their way up and wanting to have an impact in this way, where you're making quite brave, forward-thinking decisions? I know the industry is much more open to this sort of movement and these types of challenges, and but yeah, I still think it's quite hard for some, and because it's a very male-dominated industry, it can be quite difficult for women to get heard. Like, do you have any sort of tips for a young woman coming up in the industry?
Well, I think unfortunately we still need to shout louder to be heard, but we just need to, so don't kind of get discouraged by it. Just keep going and just be yourselves and be bold, so it's a bit like nobody puts baby in the corner, right? Don't put yourself in the corner, so if you're in the industry, you belong in the industry, you deserve your place, you have good ideas, so just make sure you speak your mind, so you just go for it. So I often doubt myself, but I don't let it stop me from saying something or doing something, So it's just trust in yourself, I suppose, and just go for it.
Yeah, I think that's the trick, isn't it? It's kind of feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're going to have the fear all the time. You're going to have the guilt if you have children, like I do. You're going to have the imposter syndrome every time you have to do something. You're going to have all of that, but just like put it in a little box, lock it, throw the key out, and then just acknowledge it's there, but then just move past it, so just don't let it bring you down.
Yeah, I love that so much. Well, that's it, Maria. Thank you so much. I loved that chat, and it was, I'm just so excited to kind of see what you're doing and actually what's possible across the board. Anyone can do this stuff if they really have the will. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.